welcome you to our program, Integrated Theology. I am your host, Bishop Dr. Derek A. Reeves, and let's dive right into our lesson. We're still on class number 3, Theodic, Minciology, and this is lecture 12, The Mens of God. The knowledge of God is biblically said to be knowledge of omniety. This is very important when we continue in on our study of God. Omniety is a term that means the following. It is the state of being all-comprehensive. It is allness and totality. It is the state of being all, but not from a sense of what we would call pantheistic state or what we would call an in-pantheistic state where God is the universe or God is clothed with the universe. But this deals with the state of his omniqualities being comprehensive and being all that they can be, and that there are no more and no less than everything that potential characterization is. And so it is the state of being all. Omniety for this study will express the meanings of allness and the absolute. And this in and of itself is very important because when we deal with the state of allness, again, we're talking about the omniety or the absolutum. God is absolute goodness. God is absolute love. God is absolute power. So the characteristics are linked to what we would call his substantial reality. When we talk about absolute is that which is not diminished in any way. So it deals with a state where there is no potentiality in there. There is no potential of becoming weaker, of not being, of not having. It also means totally independent. God is not dependent upon rest to gain access to his strength. God is not dependent on sleep to have mental clarity as we do. As a matter of fact, I don't believe that any angels are dependent upon rest or sleep to have mental clarity. And one of the reasons is, again, we are a living soul that breathes in oxygen or spirit, the spirit from God that keeps us alive, and then the retroactive behavior of the echo breathing where we take in natural oxygen to keep our minds alert and conscious. It also deals with completeness. If God is complete life, then there's nothing that's lacking. If God is complete sovereignty, then he really doesn't have to ask anybody anything, depend on anybody for anything. And all that he includes individuals in or the various species in is simply a desire for his, what I would call covenant relationships. He is perfect, but not just perfect, because there is a perfection in the New Testament, teleotes, that deals with coming into a state of maturity. It is a state of becoming spiritually mature, where your desire, your heart, your mind is akin to the mind, heart of Jesus. Free from limitations. And this should really cause your human mind to become just ecstatic, because when he says he can do just what no other one can do, that means there are no limitations on God, limitations that conform to his character, which means God cannot lift the rock that he cannot carry because he created the rock. However, God can lift the rock and impose human limitations upon himself and not lift it unless there is a need for it. God has lifted rocks that we cannot lift, but because of the extra dimensional, the extra, I'll say, not just dimensional, but the extra realmic. He is an individual who resides in different dimensions, different realms, different planes of existence, and yet he is transcendently above and beyond them. Even the heaven of heavens cannot contain him, according to the word. So he is free of limitations. He is free of having restrictions. And so who can restrict him? His abilities don't restrict him, neither does it mean he has a lack of ability. And so there are no restrictions with him. And then he is infallible. When it comes to infallibility, he cannot make mistakes. The knowledge within God, even when he allows things to occur to us that seemingly are not favorable in our mindset, he makes no mistake. Everything in the intricate mind of God is so intricate that they must happen because he sees the result and the outcome. It kind of reminds me in certain movies where people try to deify superheroes. And in this one particular movie, it was Doctor Strange from the Marvel comic books. And he sat in a meditative pose and he began to looking through the eye of Agamotto, which was supposed to be a jewel or an eye that gave insight to all knowledge and wisdom. And so he sat and he said, out of all of the infinite possibilities, which defies what we call pneumatocosiology, because in spiritual law, there cannot be intimate possibilities that are not connected in the same flow of the possibility. The infinite has no succession. The infinite has no quantizable reality. It is the sameness perpetually. But he said, out of all of the infinite possibilities, there's only one way we can win this. And so he knew, according to the apparatus that he used, that all things had to play out in order for victory to come. And so all things in our life has to play out for victory to come, for the shaping and the molding of our character, of our bodies, and of the preparation of us being prepared to meet him in the sky. In the state of having no limitations or being infallible mentally, God is never wrong. God is perfect. God is faultless. Even though humanity would love to blame God and say he is the fault of all their issues and problems and so forth, God is faultless from the perspective of there is no fault in him. There is no weakness in him. There is no chink in his armor. God is impeccable. God is with supremacy, and he is supreme. And then finally, number 6, when we talk about the mental infallibility of God, God is not capable of ever failing. He can do just what he thinks and just what he says. In conceiving or seeking to understand the mind of God as being absolute, infinite, this means that every element of the meaning of the mind is the state of God's mind. And that, again, is very important because that I have found 24 terminologies for minds, both some in the Hebrew, some in the Greek. So collectively, this is what a mind is in accordance to God. And so when we take the 24 perspectives of mind, and I find that very interesting, and I'm not saying that there is a significant relevance in this, but according to Earth time, there are 24 time zones. 24 words for mind. And even with the time zone, it depends on how you are referring to time or those time zones. There can be more, there can be less, depending on what you're adding in. But most of the time, there are 24 time zones, 24 considerations of time, 24 positions of time in the earth, and 24 mind sets, foundational characteristics of the mind. And if that is within a human text, within a human context, then what is the context of a divine mind? That is the thought of thought and the thinker of the thought of thought, which means he produces thoughts that enable every other being to think. And he is the originator of epistemological thought processes of logic and of critical thinking. And so, in conceiving or seeking to understand the mind of God as being absolutely infinite, this means that every element of the meanings of the mind is the state of God's mind. He is metanoio. He is considering, ever considering, never beginning, but always in a mode of considering. Nous. He is intellectually knowing. But every aspect of the mind of God brings us to the one superb, supreme thought of God. And that thought is knowing. Whenever you bring up a topic, it can be said of God, he knows it. If you talk about demonology, he knows it. If you talk about ontology, he knows it. And so the state of his mind is always in knowing phase. Specifically, the men's of God will refer to the power of his intellect. Remember, when we talk about mind, mind is inclusive of intellect, emotion, and volition. When we speak of men's from the Latin perspective, they heavily stress the intellect. And so the men's of God is the elocution of the mind that allows one to understand, to function in knowledge, to utilize knowledge, and with humans and other pneumatics to gain knowledge, to differentiate between the different knowledges, to also have knowledge of self, coming to know and coming to understand more about themselves as an individual. Intellect to God must be understood as it relates to God, not as it relates to humans. And this is a very important aspect of becoming knowledgeable in theology. There is some knowledge that God gives to us that is in relationship to us only to give us a significant understanding of how this operation of the mind can apply to God. In other words, when we think of intellect, we think of cognition. Cognition is knowing. We can know because God gave us the capacity to know. But how we come to know is not how God comes to know, because God has never come to know. God is the knowing of knowledge. And that's very important. He ended and has intellectual powers, which is very important. He ended the very scope of awareness, which means when it comes to him, there is no further. He is the sealed sum of all that can be known and of all that cannot be known. He knows the limitations placed upon humans based upon their nature. He knows the limitations based upon pneumatics, based upon their nature. Although they are transcendent in a finite way, they are still not omnipresent, omniscient, and all-powerful. The faculty of reasoning and understanding objectively with regard to God is also to have the capacity to know abstract and of academic matters. Even the simplest thought of God's thought would be so high on the academic scale that the greatest scientists who ever lived would not be able to unravel. When we deal with the intellect of God, we also have to come to understand that the understanding or mental power of God as an individual. What is the mental power of God as an individual? In many cases, you find that comic book writers, fiction writers, seek to have people who can control the elements, fire starter, people who can organize and arrange molecular structures, such as the Phoenix and other individuals, people who can rearrange atomic structure. But we see the classic evidence of the very power and the mental power of Jesus in Scripture. He turns water into wine, rearranging the very atomic structure, and over a matter of seconds, simply having them to pour out. He arranges the atomic structure, he arranges the ingredients, he brings the element of fermentation, which is a process of deliberately being set aside, having a certain degree of temperature, allowing certain things to age. And so in the pouring of the wine, he brought just through his will the process of timing, the process of maturation, the process of distilling, and all of that was through his mind. And so the ability to think, reason, and understand, the ability of his mental powers of an individual makes him the primus, makes him the first, makes him the auctoritas, the author of all things. The power of the mind to process information we have to consider. Does this apply to God? I think not, because he needs not process to come to know. He has always been in the state of minciologically knowing either emotions and the intellectual capacity of emotions, also the knowledge of volition, how emotions can force volition, and how volition then activates the will. Always remember the difference between the two. Volition is the power of the mind to choose, and the will is the actual choosing of the mind or the desire. To understand the faculty of God and to understand the minds of God, we must also understand the power of the mind to learn and form ideals. Ideals are literally a thought or a suggestion as to a possible course of action, He already knows his course of action, has already known. He already knows the course of action of all created beings, every insect, every living thing that is on the face. He knows which snake will bite who will die of the snake bite, who will call on his help. And this is very important because we have to understand God does not always change the scheme of things, because to do so would alter the lives of so many other people, either positively or negatively. And so he understands the aim or the purpose of our action. God can definitely think, but his thought is uninterrupted thought. He doesn't have to pause to conjecture. He doesn't have to pause to let it sink in. He doesn't have to ponder on it to gain an understanding. He is the understanding of understanding. And so this means there is infinite thought capacity. This thought has no beginning or ending. Infinite thought is thought that is without conclusion or without quantifiable detached topics of subject matter. In other words, it doesn't come to a conclusion. It is. He knows the end before the beginning. And so if someone ever brought a problem to you and you already knew the steps needed to resolve that problem, what would that cause you to think? How would your mind respond if you knew the answers to all questions before questions were ever asked? And so, infinite thought of thought, infinite thought is thought that is conclusionless, where you don't have to arrive at a conclusion and answer because you know it. It doesn't have quantifiable, detached topics or subject matters. The intellect is unique specifically in God. So, the intellect is unique in that he cannot learn or gather information that he does not have. And that raises another question. Why then do we who should know this very seldom stay in the presence of God seeking for answers or knowledge? It's as if part of us desires to know, the other part of us doesn't care to know. So, as one who is perfect in his intellect, minciologically perfect, he is an absolute intellectual and dimensional polymath. Very important. As an infinite dimensional polymath, he is concerned with omniology, all knowledge of knowing. You can have a lot of knowledge about automobiles, about medicine. You can have a lot of knowledge about the books that were written and even have written many yourself, but it doesn't mean that you know how to function in the processes, that you can do the processes with complete understanding and ultimate skill. An infinite dimensional omniology polymath is the minciological embodiment of all knowledge and all knowing. And again, that's very important. Not only is he all knowledge, but he's all knowing of all the knowledge. An infinite polymathic ologistic mens has no limits of knowing. He knows before the question arises. He says, I know your thoughts before you think them. I can see the very pattern of your thoughts moving through your neural pathways and your neurons. I can interpret the energy before you even begin to promote the thought. I can sense all of the electrical outputs in your brain coming through your peripheral nervous system before you can even interpret what's soft, hard, beautiful, quiet, loud, sweet smell, putrid smell. I know your thoughts before you think them. And if we consider he knows the thoughts, he knows the intellectual thoughts, the emotive thoughts, the volitional thoughts, as well as every instinctive thought of every creature. What kind of mind are we dealing with? And so an infinite polymathic mind can never rest nor stop knowing. It's not as if God can turn down the volume. Many people have an illegitimate concern when they say God rested. That term there simply means he ceased from his labors. It didn't mean that he got tired and had to rest. He simply stopped when it was done. And so an infinite polymathic mind can never stop. It can never rest. It is always in knowing position, in knowing operations. This is a perpetually knowing mind, a mind that has known throughout eternity. Omneity of knowledge is all knowledge, haseological knowledge, complete knowledge, and the fullness of the summation of where this knowledge is leading those who learn. And so the men's of God is unfiltered. It is unquantified. It is undivided into categories. The infinite ologist or ologistic polymath has one thought, and that one thought is to know, or knowing itself. And we will stop here and we will entertain questions if there be any.